Hello, my name is Raphael Dinkins, and I recently made what I believe to be the gravest mistake of my life. For context, I work as a historical researcher, and my task over the past few weeks has been to investigate whether William Shakespeare was indeed the true author of all his plays. Throughout my career, I have examined numerous documents, solving many renowned mysteries and gaining considerable recognition in my field. However, after analyzing some old Shakespearean documents, I arrived at a startling conclusion. The true author of all these plays and poems was George Floyd. My deduction was based on the faint trace of fentanyl found on the edges of the papers. I consulted with my assistant, Dr. McNutt, who concurred with my theory that George Floyd must have been the playwright, as we discovered a genetic match from the nasal mucus samples we collected from the paper, which originated from George Floyd's big-ass nose. As I began to document my findings, an unexpected loud boom startled me, and I was momentarily blinded by a bright flash emanating from the papers. It appeared as though the spirit of George Floyd had somehow been resurrected, and inexplicably, he pulled both Dr. McNutt and me into his poem. For several minutes, I was engulfed in a blinding white light, which I later realized was due to the glare from George Floyd's large nose. Gradually, my vision returned, and I found myself transported to London during the Elizabethan era, the very time when George Floyd supposedly penned his plays. I stood outside the Queen's castle and approached a man to inquire about the current year. He responded that it was April 1616, the same year that the alleged StratFloydian George Floyd was said to have died. It seemed that in those times, people were unfamiliar with the concept of counting days, as my question regarding the date was met with confusion. I made my way to the nearest opera house, hoping to witness one of George Floyd's plays. What I encountered was astonishing. I saw George Floyd himself performing alongside another man named Daniel Larson. Could it be that the famous music star Daniel Larson was also alive during the Elizabethan era? I shook my head in disbelief, only to realize that my partner, Dr. McNutt, was missing. I was watching the performance from the lobby, surrounded by rows of people who were laughing at what they considered a literary masterpiece. To be frank, I found the production to be straight-ass. I would argue that a show like Rick and Morty in Chinese would be more interesting than this shit, as it took an agonizing 2 hours for any significant action to occur. With Dr. McNutt still lost somewhere in London, I knew I had to find him, primarily because I feared what might happen if George Floyd discovered my previous remarks about him in the lab. I approached a man in the lobby who was offering rides in a carriage, akin to a taxi, and asked him for any information regarding Dr. McNutt's whereabouts. Initially nervous, I noticed that this man was different from the others. He wore a hood, and when he removed it, I was stunned to see a black man with a big-ass nose and lips. In that moment, I recognized him as George Floyd. It was one of the strangest encounters I had ever experienced, seeing George Floyd's face on what appeared to be William Shakespeare's body. Before I could react, George Floyd confronted me, saying, "I heard what you were saying about me, man. You ain't nothing. I could kill you right here." Just then, I spotted Dr. McNutt, who had arrived with 2 bodyguards from our laboratory, Effington and Jorge, 2 undocumented immigrants from Mexico, whom we had been protecting from deportation, and who were fiercely loyal to us. However, upon seeing George Floyd brandishing a fentanyl gun, Effington attempted to flee, only to be shot by Floyd, who melted him into a small puddle of blood. Incredibly, George Floyd had somehow developed the most advanced weaponry known to humanity during the Elizabethan era. Jorge and Dr. McNutt opened fire, but the bullets ricocheted harmlessly off George Floyd's large nose. Jorge charged at Floyd, shouting, "I'll fucking kill you." In a brutal display of strength, George Floyd lifted Jorge and tore him in half. Dr. McNutt and I realized we were no match for Floyd and needed to escape quickly. With Floyd possessing superior speed, it became evident that one of us would have to sacrifice ourselves to ensure the other's survival. I urged Dr. McNutt to flee, which he did. Just as Floyd was about to end my life, Daniel Larson, the other actor, unexpectedly intervened. He delivered an injection that withdrew all the fentanyl from Floyd's system, rendering him powerless. Seizing the opportunity, Dr. McNutt and I fled as Daniel Larson dealt the final blow to George Floyd. We soon understood that we were still in 1616 and needed to find a way back home. Fortunately, I had created a portal gun inspired by Rick and Morty earlier that day, but upon reaching for it, I discovered that George Floyd had stolen it from me. We returned to the scene where Daniel Larson was confronting George Floyd, and in the back pocket of Floyd's jeans, we spotted my portal gun. As Daniel Larson delivered the finishing strike, Dr. McNutt swiftly retrieved the portal gun from George Floyd and activated it, allowing all of us to return to the lab. Upon our return, George Floyd collapsed before us, unconscious. We took advantage of the situation and used the portal gun to send him to the far reaches of the universe. Everything seemed to be in order as Dr. McNutt, Daniel Larson, and I stepped outside. Where we beheld the site of our current civilization, we had much work to do studying 1616 Daniel Larson to see how he was so advanced for back in his time, but that's a story for another day.